Hello, you're watching Coronavirus Catch Up. I'm Jordan Kenny. Welcome to the programme. We're live tonight on the BBC News NI website and Facebook page and on the BBC iPlayer for the next 25 minutes or so. Thanks for tuning in, however you're joining us. So the Executive has been meeting today to review Northern Ireland's COVID-19 restrictions. You might be thinking, what's left to change? Well, there's a few things. Live music has been a big talking point, as well as the number of people allowed to gather both indoors and outdoors. So what's been agreed? Well, live music will be able to resume in venues from the 21st of June. Limits on the number of people allowed to gather inside private homes will also be raised on that date, allowing 10 people from a maximum of 2 households to gather indoors. And on gathering outdoors in a private garden, it will be 15 people from any number of households. It's also expected that theatres will be allowed to reopen. And a limit of 500 people at outdoor gatherings will be lifted and replaced with a requirement to carry out a risk assessment. Now, although the date of the 21st of June has been set for all of this, it is an indicative date. Ministers will meet again next Thursday to confirm whether or not these changes will go ahead. And to add something else into the mix, all this comes as cases of the so-called Indian or Delta variant in Northern Ireland have risen. Our political reporter, Jane McCormick, is with us to chat about, our political correspondent rather, Jane McCormick is with us to chat about all of this and of course to answer your questions. Jane, let's start with what's gone on today. Firstly, talking about live music. When we say live music, what do we actually mean?
Basically, Jordan, that's all the good stuff that we've missed from hearing when we've been out in pubs or restaurants or hotels, even over the past year and a bit since the pandemic began. So that's the likes of your musicians playing in bars, for example, bands and even singers who have been restricted because the view has been that it's risky to have people playing live music indoors. The view from health officials has been, if you have people playing together, people talking are more likely to raise their voices. There's a greater chance that the virus might spread. So that's been the view for some time. But as you say, today we got an indication from the Executive that they're looking to try and change this and hopefully help some of these musicians who really have been hampered over the past year and a bit to hopefully allow them to start performing in venues across Northern Ireland, to allow theatres and concert halls to reopen from the 21st of June. But you're right, there is an asterisk over that date because it's going to have to be given the rubber stamp at the Executive next Thursday, the 17th of June. So it hasn't exactly got the green light yet, but we are getting there.
But does this mean, for instance, Jane, we could be heading to music festivals, for instance, this summer?
That's the hope, Jordan, because as you mentioned there, they're trying to lift the cap of 500 people attending outdoor gatherings. So what I'm told that would allow is bigger music festivals to take place outdoors, and I know that some have already tried to reschedule some concerts to take place later in the summer. I'm told that would also allow the limit on people attending sporting events to be lifted, and so therefore you could get some bigger sporting events with more spectators at those later this year. And there's also the prospect, if that limit is lifted on the 21st of June, that park run might be able to start taking place again, because we know it didn't come back last year. I think there's still a little bit of guidance to come from councils around how that might work. But yeah, the plan is to get a bit more normality back. I don't think, unfortunately, people are going to make it in time for Glastonbury. It had to be cancelled this year, but there are some smaller festivals here in Northern Ireland, I think, that are crossing their fingers that they might have a good summer.
And what, Jane, has been the reaction you've been hearing to this? Are people generally happy with this, or were they hoping maybe these restrictions would be eased sooner?
I think musicians obviously would like to get back to what they love as soon as they can, but they also know that there needs to be a bit of time for businesses to also plan, to book people to come and play again, to set out the dates, to get sound engineers back in, to basically get all those people behind the scenes who give us fantastic performances, to give them the time to sort out what they're doing. So no, I think the 21st of June seems to have been viewed as a pretty reasonable date for a lot of the industry. I suppose the question for them is, what are the mitigations going to look like? Because we know, we've been told by the Executive today that even when things do ease, there still have to be limits around social distancing, so 1 metre social distancing. There's still to be no dancing from the 21st of June. So that could be a problem, because some people might say, what's the point in live music if you can't have a bit of a dance at the same time? Others might just take it as we just need to hear something rather than background music. So there are still questions about how it's going to work in practice, but it is being viewed as a bit of progress.
We might have to just, settle for a light foot tap as we sit at our tables instead of fully
Wave
pledged dancing.
your lighter.
But you talk about people who give fantastic performances, Jane. There were Van Morrison gigs planned to take place in Belfast over the next few nights. The first one was due to take place tonight, actually. Has there been any word on that? What's been the crack with those Van Morrison gigs?
Yeah, in the last hour, we've had confirmation that the concerts have been cancelled. Now, there seems to have been a bit of confusion. It all kind of developed at the last minute, really. And we got a statement from the owner of Hastings Hotels, which owns the Europa Hotel in Belfast, which is where this event was meant to be taking place over the weekend. And in it, Howard Hastings basically says that 2 months ago, he had reached out to Stormont's executive office to ask them to consider running the shows as test events. And that is because the concerts had already been rescheduled a series of times and they didn't want to let people down again. And they felt that in line with risk assessments that they had carried out, they felt the concerts could be done safely. Now, it's a pretty detailed statement, and he goes on to say that for 4 weeks, he never heard back from the executive office as to whether or not the concerts could take place. However, then last week in the assembly, Mike Nesbitt, the Ulster Unionist MLA, asked the Communities Minister Deirdre Hargey, was it her view that the concerts could go ahead? And she did say yes, so long as they keep within the regulations. Now, basically, Howard Hastings is saying that as a result of what she said in the assembly, and there was no clarification or response to the hotel to say it couldn't go ahead, they felt that it could. However, yesterday and today at the very last minute, they were told by council officials and the PSNI that live music in hospitality venues is still unlawful and it could not go ahead. And he's been pretty scathing. He said he's never been in a situation like this before, and he's had to apologise to Sir Van and all the musicians who'd gathered tonight. However, we've been told from the Department for Communities, they've said they had always advised this could not be considered a test event tonight, and ultimately, the responsibility for acting within current COVID restrictions is with the organisers of events. So it seems to have been a bit of pass the parcel on who's responsible. We know it's not going ahead this evening, and I'm sure that will frustrate some of those who had tickets. However, live music, as we know, isn't due to come back officially until the 21st of June at the earliest.
Yeah, so another week and a bit to wait for that. Jane, we already mentioned it briefly tonight, but let's chat about it a bit more. The Delta variant, that's of course the variant that was first discovered in India. We've been told that there are now more than 100 probable or confirmed cases here in Northern Ireland. Is that something that was a major concern for ministers today at the executive meeting?
I think it's definitely giving them food for thought, and I think that is why the dates that we have been given today are staying indicative for now. If they felt that things looked really good, they probably would have gone a bit firmer on these dates and saying that this will definitely happen. But we know because of the Delta variant, that has led to a rise in uncertainty. And I think ministers just want to keep that little bit of wiggle room to see how things develop over the next week or so. And we know as well, we got this pretty hard-hitting document from the Health Minister, Robin Swann, published on the department's Twitter account this afternoon. It went to all ministers. It basically was an upsum of where we are with the coronavirus situation in Northern Ireland at the moment. It made clear that he was pretty concerned that when it comes to the Delta variant, testings indicated that up to 25% of new cases here could actually be that variant. It also warns of possible significant fresh surges of positive cases by late summer or early autumn. It is important to say that the modelling that's within this paper, things like this have been wrong before or haven't come to be proven to go that way. Modelling always is looking ahead and judging what might happen as opposed to what will happen. But it is a warning from Robin Swann, and it is something that other ministers have also been saying they are concerned about today. So it's not going to go away.
Well, looking at what has happened in parts of England, they're seeing quite a substantial rise in the number of Delta variant cases, and that's led to discussion over there over whether or not all social distancing restrictions will be eased on the 21st of June, as had been planned. Is there anything you can tell us about that, Jane? What's the situation in England?
It seems to be a bit trickier over there, because what the government had also pledged was by the 21st of June in England, that final stage of their lifting of restrictions would see all legal limits on social contact removed. Nightclubs were set to reopen, and restrictions on basically everything else it claimed were going to be lifted. And I think the government has had to do a bit of backstepping from that in recent days. And we've even had the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, saying this week that, you know, he's absolutely open to delaying that final stage of lifting if it's necessary. And, you know, it's at the earliest, as opposed to this is definitely going to happen. And I think a bit of that has been reflected in what Robin Swan has also said in that paper today, because he talked about the fact that he feels normality as we knew it in 2019 is still some way off. And he even said that when it comes to the wearing of face coverings and social distancing and other restrictions around public health, he said that we're not in a place that we can start to talk about bringing that to an end. So we are in a similar situation with England when it comes to that side of things. And I think ultimately it's going to be a question for ministers and health officials going forward, how they manage the messaging around all of that, because so many people felt that when they got the vaccinations, that would change things completely. We know we're getting there with the vaccination scheme, and Robin Swan has talked about most people trying to get both jabs as quickly as possible, but there's still some way to go.
Well, let's get into the questions, Jane, that we've had sent in this week. There's been quite a few. As always, weddings are a big topic. This week's no different. We've had plenty of people get in touch who are wanting more certainty over what they can and can't do on their big day. Kieran is one of them. He's asking about what today's announcement means for live music at weddings. So will live bands be allowed back at wedding receptions then from the 21st of June? Is that what the announcement today means?
In practice, yes, that's the outworking of that. I suppose the question as well is, if you're due to get married in a venue and say at the moment there's no limit on numbers, but it's determined by risk assessment, do you then have to factor in, if you want to have a band, do you have to factor them into the number of guests and the number of people that are permitted to be inside any venue at a given time? So that's one thing to take into account. The other thing to bear in mind as well is I've had some people saying to me they don't really want to get married and have their wedding reception and pay the cost of a band, which can be expensive, if then there isn't going to be dancing allowed. And our reading of what has come out today is that there will not be dancing allowed from the 21st of June if these rules around live music are given the green light. I think from what ministers have suggested, they're talking about possibly removing restrictions on live music and dancing from the 22nd of July. And again, that has an asterisk over it, because that might not happen either. So it's still not going to be exactly how we knew weddings before the pandemic, where everybody could be up on their feet and having a great time and no social distancing. But certainly if you want to have music playing live as opposed to pre-recorded from the 21st of June, hopefully you'll be able to do that in some way or shape.
Well, that actually answers Kirsty's question, because she was in touch asking about dates for when we can expect wedding receptions to have both live music and dancing. So she should be waiting for the 22nd of July, was it you said, Jane?
Yeah, so that's been listed as an indicative date, the 22nd of July. And what ministers have said is that will need to be approved and given the green light on the 15th of July. So again, it's a case of wait and see. And I'm not sure at this stage if it will go ahead. And obviously it's difficult for brides and grooms who have been maybe holding off their big day for the prospect of, you know, getting everybody together and doing a big dance together at the end of the night. I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see and keep asking for clarity on that.
I just know there's been so many dads waiting over the past year and a half to bust out the dad dancing moves again at these weddings. So they'll be among those eager to get back on the dance floor.
They might bust their hip because it's been so long. Some of them need to practice.
I really need to go easy, ease themselves back in. But this question, Jane, is a bit more specific. It's from a bride-to-be. She'll remain nameless so that we don't spoil her wedding plans. But she's been in touch and is asking, can I have a wedding reception in my private garden with a professional marquee set up and numbers based on a risk assessment? Now, there's no date attached to that, so I'm not exactly sure when they're hoping to have that, but presuming it would be after the 21st, is that something that would be allowed?
No, my understanding is, at the minute anyway, you can only have 15 people from 3 households allowed in your private garden. Now today, the executive has put out this indicative date that from the 21st of June, that will change and you'll be allowed to have 15 people from an unlimited number of households in your back garden. But 15 people at a wedding seems awfully small. So no, there's no talk about allowing you to have your wedding in your back garden with numbers based on risk assessments. That is still limited to venues who would carry that out as opposed to somebody's back garden. So that might be slightly disappointing for that bride at the moment, but they are staying pretty rigid when it comes to the numbers that we're allowed to have in our back garden at the moment.
So if that's where the confusion is, the private gardens, there's no risk assessments, but for public outdoor spaces, there can be risk assessments.
Yes, as far as I'm aware, there's nothing around private gardens and people being allowed to set up their own kind of thing and use a risk assessment to judge whether that's okay or not.
And just before we go any further, actually, just a reminder for anyone who might be watching on Facebook, feel free to get involved in the comment section if you're watching on there. If you have any questions about what's being discussed, I see we have a few in already that we'll get to shortly. But yeah, any questions about what we're discussing or what's been announced from the executive today, feel free to leave them in there. Just while we're on the topic of important events though, Jane, there's another one starting this weekend, the Euros. Turkey versus Italy will see the start of the tournament tomorrow night. Firstly, Jane, are you a football fan? Are you going to be on the edge of your seat watching Turkey v Italy?
I may not be, but I'm sure there will be plenty of people who will be because it's been...
I heard rumours you're captaining the five-a-side BBC football team, no?
I don't know where you got that from. I will happily referee. I will not captain. I will referee if anybody wants to bring me in to do that. No, I'm sure there will be plenty of people who are looking forward to it because feels like such a long time since we've had any sort of massive, large-scale sporting event or any event really on screens that people can get hooked into. So it's going to be something a lot of people will be keen to watch, Jordan. But no, I'm not the biggest football fan, but I'm sure I'll be watching some of it.
Well, for those people that do want to watch it, Jane, one question I'm sure quite a few people will have is, will bars and restaurants and pubs be allowed to show the games on big screens? Is that something that is allowed under the restrictions?
I haven't seen anything in the regulations that would ban that kind of thing. Now, if you remember last year, obviously, when things reopened, pubs, wet pubs, as they were called then, they weren't allowed to open because you could only go into a place if you were having a meal as well. I haven't seen any pubs this year advertise if they're going to be showing the Euros, but you'd have thought there's nothing to ban it, so there's no reason, I suppose, why they couldn't. We'll maybe have to wait and see if there's any guidance that drops around all of that, but I don't see why not, so long as there's still table service and people are staying apart and that kind of thing.
Okay, well, we'll move on to travel. We've had quite a few questions sent in on this topic as well. There's been a lot of uncertainty about a lot of things during the pandemic, but travel definitely seems to be one of the areas where there's been the most uncertainty over the past year and a bit. But starting with travel close to home, firstly, this question from Hopeful Holidaymaker asks, are you allowed to travel to the Republic of Ireland from Northern Ireland for a holiday at the minute, Jane?
Yes, we know that the guidance around travelling to other parts of the common travel area changed about a week and a half ago or so. So they lifted the guidance around self-isolating when you're coming back from the Republic of Ireland or other parts of the UK. So in theory, yes, you can. There's no rule around self-isolating. However, what I would say is obviously the Republic of Ireland is slightly behind us when it comes to easing its restrictions. So at the minute, I think it's only outdoor hospitality is allowed to open. I think indoor hospitality isn't reopening until the start of July. So in terms of what is actually open or in terms of the rules on hotels there at the moment, it may not be that practical to go for a holiday unless you're going to self-catering accommodation, for example. But yeah, there's nothing to stop you. And certainly when you come back, there's no rule around quarantining either.
Well, what about, Jane, if you've been in Great Britain and are returning to Northern Ireland via Dublin Airport, do you need a PCR test if you're travelling straight home from Northern Ireland from Dublin Airport to Northern Ireland from Dublin Airport?
Yeah, there are quite a lot of rules around when you should take tests and how many you should take. So the advice that we have, and this is from the NI Direct website, which is basically the government website and has an awful lot of information around coronavirus. It says even if you're travelling within the common travel area, so that would extend to England, Northern Ireland and Dublin, they're all part of the common travel area. It says you should take one test before you begin your journey home. And then you should also take another test on day two after you've arrived, and then a further test on day 8 of your stay as well. Now that is guidance. It's not mandated in law, but I think the executive has put that out there. One to try and ensure that people are, using common sense when they're traveling, because there is a risk of the virus spreading when it comes to travel. And two, I think to maybe reassure people who might be coming home. Say, for example, you haven't seen your friends or family in quite some time and you want to come home, but you're worried about spreading the virus. It's also to reassure people who are traveling that they don't have it. And I think we've talked about this before on coronavirus catch up. You can go online, you can book those lateral flow tests and get them delivered out. So there is a way to do that, and I think that's what the government is advising people do.
And just to be completely clear, there's no quarantining involved in any travel within the common travel area?
No, there's not. And it was never law that you should do that. But up until recently, the advice was if you were travelling from Northern Ireland to other parts of the common travel area and vice versa, then you should self-isolate for 10 days when you're coming back to Northern Ireland. But I think they recognise that with lifting the rules around indoor hospitality and wanting to open up tourism, particularly when we have the green list for international travel now, they needed to relook at the advice around the common travel area, because there was a lot of confusion and complaints from tourism industry representatives that this didn't really make any sense and would affect the sector over the summer. So that's now been scrapped. There's no self-isolation requirement if you're travelling domestically. Obviously, there is still that if you're coming from overseas areas.
Well, just looking at our Facebook questions that we've had sent in, we've got this one from Chris. He says he works in a theatre and is wanting to know, when will social distancing be scrapped for theatres? So obviously we've got that indicative date of the 21st of June when they might reopen, but when they do reopen then, Jane, will social distancing be something they have to implement?
I think so. That seemed to be the basis for the executive giving the indicative date of this tonight. They're still saying that social distancing of 1 metre at least will need to be in place. Now, it might be that theatres end up in a similar position to cinemas, where you would seat people in terms of households or bubbles, for example, and so you'd be leaving gaps between where people are sitting. I think the difficulty will be how that works for theatres in practice, because we know from speaking to the likes of the Lyric in the past and the Grand Opera House that for some of them, if they were to do that, they obviously have to cut their capacity by quite some bit, and that affects their profits and affects the number of people that they can actually hold for events. So I don't know if that will change. Certainly, if you go by what Robin Swan was saying today, he seemed to be suggesting it's not going to disappear anytime soon. But I think there's just a question mark over how long it will last at the moment.
We've got another question on Facebook here. It's been sent in asking, they're asking, can I have a birthday party in a hall? So basically, are we allowed to book out, I suppose, community halls or public halls to host events, private events?
That's a good question. I don't know exactly the answer. I suppose we've been told there's an indicative date of the 21st of June for conference halls to reopen and that kind of thing. So that would suggest then that they'd want to get people back into conferences. But I think the rule at the minute is if you're hiring somewhere like that and you intend to have more than, I think it's 30 people, more than 30 people indoors, I could be wrong, it could be more than 15, then you have to do risk assessments. I think the best thing to do probably would be to check with the venue that they want to hire and see what is allowed under the regulations. I think that's why the executive is trying to lift the cap on outdoor gatherings, because they feel much more comfortable with people gathering in outdoor spaces where we know the risk is much lower. And obviously there's going to be no limits there, because hopefully they're going to lift that cap of 500 people from the 21st of June. So that might be the way to go.
And Una on Facebook is asking, does the rule of 10 apply to meeting inside rented holiday accommodation? So of course that rule of 10 will again be not until the 21st of June, but that will apply presumably, Jane, to holiday accommodation as well? I
think so, because at the minute, the current rule, which is 6 from 2 households, that also applies to holiday accommodation. I can't imagine why they wouldn't then apply that across the board. You're still going indoors into a home with somebody. Just because it's not your own home, but it's a home that you're renting, doesn't mean that would change. But I think we'll just have to wait and see, and maybe get full details from the executive if and when they sign this off. But yeah, I can't imagine why they'd make an exception there if you're going on holiday with somebody.
Okay, a couple more questions here, Jane, that we'll rattle through. Tom has been in touch. He says he finds the guidance on returning to working in his office confusing. And he's wanting to know, what's the executive's current position on this? Are we still being encouraged to work from home where possible?
I haven't seen a change to their advice on their website. It is obviously something as well that executive ministers haven't really talked about recently, really. I mean, obviously there's been an awful lot going on the politics side of things, but actually the restrictions tend to have taken a bit of a backseat until recently. So we haven't even really asked. I would have thought that it's, I suppose, up to employers to check NI Business Info, which is the economy, Department for the Economy's website that has the latest advice on what is safe and whether or not employers should be getting people back into the workplace. But we can certainly ask and try and find out what the view of ministers is on that.
Okay, and the last question for tonight, Jane, is from Neil. He wants to know, is the public health guidance still to keep 2 metres distance and to wear masks?
So obviously, there are laws on face coverings. We know that when it comes to going into shops and if you're on public transport and in obviously around schools, there's guidance on wearing them in schools. You have to wear face coverings. And as I've said, Robin Swan hinting very strongly today that is not going to go away anytime soon. I think when it comes to the 2 metre distancing, that seems to kind of changed a little bit over the course of the pandemic. So I think what a lot of restaurants are working with now is the 1 metre plus. And I think that will probably then, it seems that will extend to like hotel or restaurant, or not hotels, sorry, concert venues and theatres and that kind of thing. They're being told 1 metre plus as well. So I think health officials would say, where preferable or where possible, it's better to have 2 metre distancing. But I think they're aware that a lot of businesses cannot operate at that level of distancing, so they're prepared to relax it slightly. And I think, again, it's up to individual businesses or workplaces or offices to then determine what level of social distancing they have. But I think the base limit is 1 metre plus. And again, I haven't heard anybody in Stormont saying that they're looking at scrapping that anytime soon.
Well, Jane, we have definitely put you through your paces tonight. We've covered a lot of different topics, but you've been brilliant. You'll be glad to hear we've no time for any more questions for you, so I'll let you go. But thanks so much for joining us tonight on Coronavirus Catch Up. Now, just briefly before we finish, to give you an update on the latest COVID-19 figures for Northern Ireland from the Department of Health. 109 new cases of coronavirus have been recorded in the past 24 hours and 19 people are being treated for the virus in hospital. However, there has been no new deaths linked to the virus. Well, that's it from us for this week. Thanks again to Gian, our political correspondent, for taking the time to come on and answer those questions. And thanks as well to those of you who took the time to get in touch with us. If we didn't have time to get to your question and you still would like to know the answer, feel free to drop us an email. You can reach us at bbcnewsni@bbc.co.uk. Just make sure you put coronavirus catch up in the subject of your email. Don't forget, you can keep up to date with all the latest developments on the BBC News NI website, which you'll find at bbc.co.uk/newsni. And you can follow us on social media as well. If you're watching on Facebook, you'll have already found our Facebook page, but we're on Twitter, Instagram and YouTube as well. Just type in BBC News NI when you're on there and you should find us. But that's it from us for now. I'll see you again on the next Coronavirus Catch Up. But until then, stay safe.